Okay, perfect. Thank you. So it's just okay. Okay, so good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining again. It means that day one was well received. So thank you for that. So this is day two of the FDP, and we'll be discussing we'll be continuing the discussion of what we saw yesterday. So in the yesterday's session, I just want to give a brief recap. Of course, I don't have a slide for that, but just to give a brief recap. So we started identifying what is the overall research idea. So I talked about the fact that we'll be dealing with more with self-adaptation for software architecture, and I gave a background for what is software architecture, an analogy for software architecture, and why we need adaptation. And then we saw what is self-adaptation. We saw the different frameworks that could be used for performing self-adaptation. Then we saw how machine learning can be used in self-adaptation. And finally, we came into this part on we can apply all these techniques together for better architecting IoT systems. So that is where we stopped. We also saw some of the challenges that exist in architecting IoT systems and how self-adaptation could be used. Okay, so that was about day one. So in day two, just to give an overview of what we are going to see. So in day two, it will be more about handling some of those challenges. So I'll try to address those challenges based on the research that we have done for the last 3-4 years. And then we'll go and see how each of the challenges could be solved. And so today's lecture, it will be more, let's say, application oriented and a little bit technical. And because last day it was more of theoretical, and I feel that somehow theoretical sometimes can be boring as such. Anyway, so let's start day two. So these were the research questions that we saw yesterday. So the first research question is about how to perform effective and efficient proactive adaptations using machine learning techniques. The second was about how machine learning technique can be used to continuously improve the adaptation process. So this is where we saw how we can move from traditional self-adaptation to self-learning. And in the RQ3, we'll be seeing how we can provide guarantees to machine learning, because as I was saying yesterday, machine learning can give wrong predictions, and this could lead to wrong adaptations. So when a software is running, if the adaptation made is wrong, it could completely affect the entire performance of the software. So we cannot afford to do that. And finally, it will be about generalizability, how this approach can be generalized, not just to IoT system, but general to any software system. But unfortunately, due to time constraints and things like that, I'll be only addressing the first three questions today. Of course, you could feel free to check my research or the research that we have been doing. So I'll give some links at the end of the session. Okay. So the envision solution, okay, this is also something we saw yesterday. So at the end of the day, I'll try to convince you at least that the future will look something like this, where you will have a software architecture. We'll first validate the software architecture. We'll deploy the architecture. Once we deploy the architecture, we continuously monitor the performance of the software. We gather all the performance related metrics. We use machine learning to learn from the metrics to understand any possible failures or any possible issues with the performance. Then we perform adaptation. And this process, as you can see, is a cyclic diagram, and it keeps continuing throughout the life cycle of the system. So my objective today will be to end the talk saying how we can get to this kind of solution. Okay. Okay, so let us go to the first research question, which is how to perform effective and efficient proactive adaptation using machine learning techniques. So when I say proactive, what we are going to do in this kind of research question is we are essentially moving from a traditional reactive approach flow to a proactive approach flow. Okay. So in a reactive approach flow, what happens? This is something we saw, right? So we saw that we collect the execution data, we analyze the data, we check if there is any violation. If there is any violation, then and there, you identify an adaptation plan and you execute it. So this can be like you identified that suddenly a software component has failed and you immediately perform an adaptation. So this is about reactive. So you perform something only when something happens. Now we are going to the proactive side of it. In the proactive side, what we do is we collect the data, we analyze the data, but we predict, we foresee if there is going to be any possible issues or not. If there is any possible issues, what we'll see is then we identify an adaptation plan and then we execute it. So if you can see, there is a big difference in the two diagrams. So in the first diagram, you don't have a generate forecast because we are doing it then and there. But in the second diagram, you forecast something. And then you see for possible goal violations, not current goal violation. You are predicting any possible goal violation, then you identify and you execute. Okay. But then the biggest question is, how do you generate this kind of forecast? Because we need some kind of baseline, right? So what will the data look like? How can you perform forecast? Right? So there are some kind of challenges and there are some kind of possibilities. So one of the possibility is any quality of service data has a temporal nature. So temporal nature means there is a quality of service data that you can log for every instance of time. The time might not be uniform, okay? So for example, in the first minute, as you see in the second example, right? If you take an average response time of a server per minute, you can get a data like this. So in the first minute, the response time is 0.6 seconds. In the second minute, it was 0.5 seconds. The third minute, it was 0.8 seconds, and so on and so forth. So we can get these kind of data from the system logs. When a system executes, from the execution logs, you can generate these kind of data. If you say this kind of data, it is a simple temporal data, or rather, you could easily say this is a time series data. Okay, where if you ask me if it is a uniform time series data, well, the answer could be yes and no, because sometimes the time intervals might not be uniform. But of course, you could convert any such data to a uniform time series data. Okay, so here we get a time series data. So predicting the expected quality of service becomes nothing but a time series forecasting problem. So this is a very well-known research problem, both in the statistics and machine learning communities. So how you can perform time series forecasting? So when I say time series forecasting, what are some examples of it? Very simplest example of a time series forecasting is the weather forecast, right? So if you want to go and check tomorrow's weather, you could go into your app like AccuWeather or whatever, you can just go and see what will be tomorrow's expected weather, right? What they are doing is they are doing a simple time series forecasting. So they have the pattern of how the weather has progressed over the last several decades. And then based on that, they are making prediction for tomorrow or the days after that. You can even go to some websites and check for the next 30 days of weather. So they are nothing but time series predictions. Now, another biggest example of time series data or time series forecasting is something like stock market prediction. So today the stock market value is this. What will be the stock market value tomorrow? Or what will be the stock market value the next second? Because the stock market changes in microseconds, right? So all these are kind of time series data. Okay. So here, what we are saying is any quality of service data can be a time series data, and we can convert the problem of predicting the quality of service to a time series forecasting problem. So this is the essence of handling the first research question. Okay. So basically, what it means, if you have a time series like QT, I mean Q1, Q2, Q3, etc., up to QT, if you want to predict the next K length sequence, that's what I'm writing here, right? Qt plus 1 to Qt plus k. If you want to make this prediction, it is nothing but the probability of getting those values given the previous set of j values, right? So what you see here is what is the probability to predict a k-linked sequence given a set of previous values. What will be the probability that will actually determine your prediction, right? So one of the important properties or one of the challenges that we have is quality of service data may have high variation and traditional forecasting methods might not work. So if you are having some kind of machine learning background, you might know that there are many time series techniques like using ARIMA models or many statistical models like simple exponential smoothing or Holt-Winters and all those kind of models. But in the case of quality of service data, there might not be a clear seasonality or trend. So predicting might be very challenging. So how do you handle that? That is where something like a recurrent neural network can help, right? So recurrent neural network is nothing but a class of deep neural network. So we are going into the deep learning side of it. It is a supervised learning technique, and it is traditionally or fundamentally used for data, for predictions where the data has a sequential nature. Okay. One of the coolest example of recurrent neural network is how the Google Translate works. So if you want to translate from one language to another language, you simply go and type in Google Translate, you get the new translation. It is nothing but a recurrent neural network that is working behind the scenes. Or in the Google search, when you type some keywords, it is predicting the next set of keywords. It is again nothing but a recurrent neural network behind the scenes. So recurrent neural network is widely used in these kind of problems where the data has a sequential nature, because any textual data has a sequential nature, right? And what is a sequential data? Sequential data is nothing but any particular point of the data is determined by some kind of a previous instance. For example, I'm saying today is a very sunny day, okay? So the fact that it is a sunny day somehow is determined by the context that it is today, okay? So today is a very sunny day means that I start with the context that today is there. So only if I know if the day is today, I can say that it is a sunny day, right? So these kind of data is generally a sequential data. So a time series data perfectly fits in as a sequential data, right? But let us see what is a recurrent neural network all about. So as I said, it is used in sequence prediction problems, especially in speech, language translation, time series prediction, and so on. So for example, what do you see? I mean, what do you see in this figure is a simple recurrent neural network, right? So there is an input, there is a set of recurrent networks, recurrent units, and then you have an output, right? So if you unroll this network, what you get this is the actual recurrent neural network. So you will have multiple inputs, which is like a t-sized vector where you have a x0 to xt as the input values, and you have output like x0 to xt, and in between you have a hidden layer. So in hidden layer, you can see there are multiple neurons, and they are connected to each other within the same layer. And this is the main, let's say, a crux behind the recurrent neural network. That is, there is a recurrent flow of information between the neurons in the same layer. In a traditional neural network, you don't have this flow. You have flow from the input to the output, or from the output back to the input in back propagation, but you don't have flow of information between the neurons in the same layer, right? So that is why it is called recurrent neural network, because there is a recurrent flow of information between the neurons in the same layer, okay? But one of the biggest problem in a traditional recurrent neural network is something as follows. Let us consider that we have an input time series, okay, of average response time per minute. So in the 0th minute, the system was, let's say it was very slow, and I mean, no one logged it, but let's say it was 3 seconds, and then the first minute it was 6 seconds, and the second minute it was 18 seconds. So there is some kind of trend in the data, okay? So what happens is when you feed this data, it will go like this. X0 will take the value 0, and H0 will have the value 3, okay? X1 will have the value 1, H1 will have the value 6, X2 will have the value 2, H2 will have the value 18. And similarly, the network will be fed with this kind of values. Now, what happens is, as the series grows in length, okay, as the series grows in length, at some point, if you want to say that what will be the value at time t, and you expect the recurrent neural network to predict it is 26, okay, but this might not happen. That is because what happens in a traditional recurrent neural net is that once you get the input, okay, it takes some value of it, it processes it, and it sends some part of it to the next neural network, next neuron. Similarly, it takes the previous value, does some processing, and sends to the next neuron. Takes the value, gets it, and sends to the next neuron. It goes like this. But at some point, what happens is, over a period of time, by the time it reaches, like, let's say the 10th neuron or the 11th neuron, it might not have the information of the first neuron, because as the data gets transmitted between the neurons, it might lose the information, right? This is called a vanishing gradient problem. I'm trying to explain it in a very simplistic way, okay? If you go, there is a lot of mathematical principle behind it, but I don't want to spend much time on it. So this is generally called long-term dependency, because if your prediction at the tth value depends on your first value, a traditional recurrent neural net might not be an optimal option, because as the number of neurons increases in your layer, there might be an information loss, because it might not get the information of the first neuron by the time it reaches the last neuron. So this is generally called as a vanishing gradient problem. And this leads to the problem that handling long-term dependency is hard. And if you see a quality of service data, sometimes your first data point might influence the, let's say, nth data point. So you need to have this kind of information. Only then you can make good prediction with great accuracy. So how do you solve it? Okay. That is when, in 1997, if I'm not wrong, some of the wonderful computer scientists, they came up with this idea of LSTMs, which is called long short-term memory neural network. Okay. It is again a class of recurrent neural network. So it is nothing, you cannot say that it is not a recurrent neural network. It is a recurrent neural network. So it is one class of recurrent neural network, but it has the ability to store long-term dependencies. And it can give predictions even up to 60 time steps, okay? It can predict a future up to 60 time steps, where the time steps can be seconds or minutes or months or years or whatever, okay? So in a LSTM, compared to a traditional recurrent neural network, what it does is it has multiple gates, okay? So what it does is, let's say there is an information coming from a neuron, and it goes to another neuron and goes to another neuron. Inside each neuron, it will have 4 different gates, okay? And you can see that it uses 2 different types of activation functions. One is a sigmoid and one is a tanh. The first cell is called an input gate, which determines how much of previous information is important. Then you have something called a forget gate, which tells how much data it needs to forget. Then you have something called a cell state, which says how much data it needs to store inside the neuron. And then there is an output gate, which tells how much data it needs to send to the next neuron. Okay. Again, I'm not going into details of it, but I'm just giving an intuitive idea, as the slide says. But this is how LSTMs is able to handle the problem of long-term dependency and work comparatively really better than a traditional recurrent neural network. Okay. And this is what we are going to use throughout our research for performing forecast. Okay. So that was the basic idea of LSTMs. So now we have a problem to solve. So we know that LSTMs can make predictions. LSTMs can make a good amount of predictions for quality of service data, and we know that this could be used for performing proactive adaptation. But the biggest question that we have is, does MAPE support machine learning or not? Okay, so let us revisit MAPE loop. Yesterday we saw the framework. We saw that, okay, there is a managed system, which is your running software. And then there is a managing system where you have 4 different activities, which is monitor, analyze, plan, and execute, and they share a knowledge base. But the biggest problem is there is no scope in MAPE for machine learning, right? We are just saying you are monitoring something, you are analyzing, you are planning and executing. Okay, but where does learning happen? Because there is nothing called learning, or there is no loop called learning inside the MAPE, right? So this is one of the challenges. So the question is, does MAPE support learning? If it supports learning, how ahead we need to forecast, right? Should we forecast for the next 10 minutes, or should we forecast the quality of service data for the next 20 minutes? How ahead we need to forecast, and how frequently we need to forecast? Should we forecast every 1 day, or should we forecast every 2 days? So just to give a very easy example, these days the COVID is going in a very bad way. So every day, sometimes I look in Google News and check for some kind of predictions to see when will the curve decline in India, right? But you can see that the prediction does not happen every day, right? It happens because it happens only over a period of days. Let's say after every 2 days, there will be a new prediction. That is because they need the 2 days of data to make the next prediction, right? So how frequently you need to forecast is another important question. So now we know that MAPE does not support machine learning, right? So this is where we came up with this approach, okay? And this approach initially was published in the International Conference on Software Architecture in 2019 as a new idea, where we said that, okay, let us do one thing. Let MAPE exist, okay? We will add the machine learning engine on the top of MAPE, okay? And this machine learning will take care of all the things like performing forecast, creating machine learning models, and things like that, okay? Now, how the system works. Okay, the managed system is an IoT system, because we are talking in the context of an IoT system, right? Then you have a monitor activity, which continuously monitors the quality of service data of the IoT system. So this can be the energy efficiency, the energy consumed by the sensors, or it can be the data traffic in the network, or it could be the response time taken by the edge devices, and so on, okay? Then the monitor activity will store the data, and then it will keep pushing the data to analyze activity. So the analyze activity will have 2 different components. One is a data processor, and another one is a quality of service predictor. Okay, so the predictor is going to make predictions, okay, and it is going to do it in real time. Okay, and there is a data processor which processes the data in such a way that it could be used by the machine learning model. Okay, now you can ask me a straightforward question. Okay, Karthik, you are saying that it is making the prediction, but where does it learn, right? The learning happens in the machine learning engine. Okay, so that is where, if you see the legend, we have 2 phases for the approach. One is an operational phase, and another is a build phase. Okay, so the build phase is nothing but, you can see this dotted lines. It is the execution of the machine learning engine, and the machine learning engine gets executed only periodically. So every 1 day or every 2 days, the machine learning engine gets executed. Okay, and whenever it gets executed, what it does is it takes all the quality of service data from the monitor activity, perform learning, okay, create machine learning models, and then it puts the machine learning models in the knowledge base. Okay, now once the machine learning model comes to the knowledge base, the analyze activity simply takes the latest machine learning model to make the prediction. Okay, once it makes the prediction, it is sent to the plan activity, where the plan activity takes the prediction, understands the problem, and then comes up with an adaptation plan, and this is then executed with the help of an executor. Okay, so this is a very, let's say, a very high level overview of how the approach works. What we need to understand is that we have a machine learning engine which is not running not running in real time, but it runs periodically every 1 day or every 2 days. It takes all the data, which is the historical data that is collected by the monitor activity, creates machine learning models, and from time to time it updates the machine learning models in the knowledge base. Okay. And in the knowledge base, what we have? In the knowledge base, we have something called quality of service goals. Okay. So yesterday I was saying about the adaptation goal. So here is where we put all the goals. Goals will say something like the energy consumption of the sensor should not go above 10 joules every 10 minutes. Or the response time of the system should not go more than 1 minute, right? So all these goals will be put as files in the knowledge base. Then there will be a repository for storing all the machine learning models, right? So all the machine learning models that will be built by the machine learning engine will be stored inside this repository. And then there will be configurations, to perform some kind of mapping between the analyze activity and the plan activity. Okay, so those are implementation details. Okay, so this is the general overview of the approach. And then now let us look at one important thing, which is what is machine learning engine all about, right? So the machine learning engine does this. It first takes the quality of service data from the monitor activity, okay? Then it has its own data store, which is nothing but a database, okay? It stores all the data. Then there is a feature extractor, which takes the data and performs some kind of feature extraction. So what kind of feature extraction are we talking about? So generally the quality of service data, especially in IoT system, can be a very much a raw data, okay? There won't be any kind of uniformity. It will be really an unstructured data. So what feature extractor does is it removes all those things that are not necessary. It kind of reshapes it such that it has only the necessary data, and it converts a raw data into a uniform time series data. Once it does that, it splits the data into two parts. One is a training set and a testing set. I'm sorry. So the training set is then sent to a model builder, which is nothing but the long short-term memory neural network. So the neural network then takes the training set, performs the learning, and once the learning is done, the trained LSTM network or the machine learning model is sent to a model evaluator component. Okay, the model evaluator component takes the testing set, evaluates how good the model is. If the model is good enough, then it sends the trained model. You can see that the trained model comes to the knowledge base. If the model is not good, then a retraining is performed. So how do you check the model is good or bad? You can simply keep a kind of an accuracy measure and say that if the accuracy measure is less than this value, you can say that the model is not good, right? And this is an ongoing work that we are going to publish in a journal. So this can be available in this link. I'll try to share the slides after the presentation. Okay. Okay. So a simple architecture of the LSTM that we have used, it's a traditional LSTM model. So you have the input layer, the hidden layer. We also added a dropout because we don't want the learning to have an overfitting or an underfitting issue. So we added a dropout, and we have an output layer, right? So this is the simplest architecture. I mean, it's based on the traditional architecture of the LSTM that we have used in this approach. Okay, so now the question is, okay, Karthik, that's good. You are saying about IoT system, you are saying about LSTM network, but where are you going to apply this, right? So that's where we have a real system. So we have something called NDR. NDR is it's an abbreviation for an Italian terminology. It stands for something called Notte di Ricercatore. It's an Italian word. It means Night of the Researchers. Okay, so it is part of the European Researchers Night event. So in this event, what happens is the general public, that is the people, the people from the city as well as the scientific community, they are brought together. So it is like an exhibition. Okay, that happens. It's like a one-day exhibition that happens in the city of L'Aquila, which is where I come from, right? So in this city, you have multiple places where there'll be exhibition stalls, and people could just move through the city lanes, and they could go to different exhibition stalls, and they could go and talk to the scientific community, understand what they are doing, and so on and so forth. Okay. We also have an app, a mobile app, which could help people to navigate through the city center to understand which event is happening in which venue, or what are the timings of the event, and so on. So basically, it is nothing but a scientific exhibition. Okay, it's a science exhibition event that happens throughout the city. Okay, and it is an outdoor event, but there are also some kind of indoor activities. So there are some venues which are only indoor events, where only indoor events happens, and there are some events which takes place only in outdoors. Okay. So there are some kind of observations we have from the scenario. Okay. The first thing is around 35,000 people attend the event. Okay. Okay. Of course, compared to India, this is nothing. Okay. 35,000 people is nothing when you compare to Indian standard. But 35,000 people in Italy is a huge number. Okay. And 35,000 people attending an event in one single day is a big thing. And it's a small city. It's not a big city. And the entire city will be crowded. And late hours are more crowded than early hours. Okay, of course, because people come from work and then they go to see the exhibition. Okay, and then the late hours will be more crowded. And this exhibition takes place till night 12 o'clock. Okay, so it will be full of people. There will be food. There will be a lot of events. There will be like kind of disco events and things like that. Then another condition, I mean, another important parameter is that weather condition affects user preferences. So if it is raining, probably people don't want to go to the outdoor activity, so they stay for indoor events. If it is not raining, if it is very sunny, then all people, they want to go for the outdoor events. And then crowding happens in the city center. So the center of L'Aquila is a very small place. And since it is very small, when 35,000 people suddenly come, it means that there is going to be a tremendous amount of congestion, right? And this is because many people come with cars and there are less parking lots available and most of the venues will be full, okay? So then we were approached, which is the University of L'Aquila team was approached to understand how we can reduce this, right? Then the goal was to develop an IoT-based solution for performing crowd management. So how you can come up with a system so that you could give real-time notification to people about how many seats are available in a venue or how many parking lots are available so that people don't get crowded in the city center, right? So that was the two important goals. So to support automated venue and parking lot management. So the objective again was to create an IoT system that supports these two functionalities. Then we have two important constraints in this scenario. One is the limited availability of external power source. Okay, so you cannot go with wired sensors because you are going to deploy the sensors in the city center. Okay, and the power sources are extremely limited. So you have to go for battery powered sensors. So that is the first constraint. The second constraint is you need to ensure that the sensor is able to communicate in real time, as much real time as possible. That is why it is called service accuracy. If the sensors are not communicating in the real time, what can happen is that it can lead to congestion, right? So these are the two important constraints that we have. Now, based on this constraint, how we can apply our approach. So the first important thing that we can do is to create an overall architecture of the system, right? So we came up with this architecture. We said, okay, let us do one thing. Let us take case of 3 venues and 2 parking lots. Okay, of course there are more than this, but for the sake of simplicity, I'm just explaining about 3 venues and 2 parking lots. Okay, and let us divide the system into 2 parts. One is the automated venue control subsystem and another is an automated parking control subsystem. Okay, and for each venue, let us have a RFID reader. So whenever a person enters the venue, the RFID reader will, keep note. Okay, one person has entered, and it will send the data to a controller component, which then sends the data to a database. Then in the exit of every venue, we'll have a people counter. So whenever a person walks through the exit, he will go through the people counter, and then we'll get the count of people exiting the venue. Okay. Then let us put a display in front of the venue which says how many slots are available and how many slots are full. Okay. Similarly, let us do for each of the venues. So we had 3 venues, and in each of the venues we did this. Now, similarly, let us go for the parking lots. Let us keep 2 parking lots. Okay. And in 2 parking lots, what we are planning to do is let us put 1 parking mat in the entrance and 1 parking mat in the exit. Okay. So whenever the car goes through the entrance of the parking lot, it passes through the mat. Okay, and whenever it passes through the mat, we'll get a count. Similarly, for parking 2 also we'll do this, and let us put a display in front of the parking lot saying how many lots are available and how many lots are free. Okay, now let us send all this data to a database, and the database can then send the data to some processing component which can send the data to the user mobile apps or different kind of notification services so that the users know which parking lots are free and which venues are free and so on. Okay, but again, the constraint is how do you save battery, or how do you ensure that the sensors operate in an energy efficient manner, because these are going to be deployed in a wireless scenario and you need the sensors to stay as much long as possible, right? But if the sensors drain, I mean, if they run out of battery, it can happen that the system is going to fail. Okay. Okay, so that was about the motivating scenario. So I think I'm going little ahead. So what I'll do is I'll just take a pause for a minute and then ask you if you have any questions. In the meanwhile, what you can also do is you can go into the link, the Menti link that I had put in the Google Meet now. So you can go there and you can log in. So let's see. Let us take a small quiz like yesterday, right? Uh, so. So this is the first question. So if you can go and log into the Mentimeter. So it's not yesterday's link, okay? Today it's a different link. I think I had shared it, right? Yeah, so it's there in the Google Meet. So you can just go and click on it. Okay, perfect. Only one person has so far answered. Any other answers? I think you just have to click on the link and you'll be inside it, right? Great, so 2 people have answered. I should probably put this as a quiz. People are getting biased because of the answers. Only 2 people? Yesterday I saw at least 11 people participating. What happened? It will be great if you can participate. It will be interactive, right? It's a simple question. Why proactive adaptation is hard to accomplish? Is it because it is not efficient? Is it because predicting with good accuracy is hard? Or is it because it may impact the current state of system, right? What do you think is the answer? Okay, I think people are more shy today than yesterday. Okay, so, okay, 3, that's good. Okay, so you can continue there. So whoever wants to give an answer, you can just go and answer there and we'll come back and we'll discuss, right? So I'll just move on with the next slide, okay? But please do participate, okay? It's very important so that I also get a feeling that people are attending the session and they are alive, right? Okay, great. So how do we implement the system, right? How do we experiment? How can you check if the approach is good or bad, right? The first thing we did is we didn't implement the real system, okay? What we did is we implemented the system using a simulation tool, okay, which is called CupCarbon. So CupCarbon is a state-of-the-art IoT simulation tool. It is particularly used for smart city IoT simulation, okay? And what you see in this image is the interface of CupCarbon. So you can see that there are different sensors, right? So all this whatever you see like 837, 827, 826, all these are sensors, right? So each of the circles denote a sensor. And what you see behind the scenes is the map of the city of L'Aquila, okay? So it is an OpenStreet map of the city of L'Aquila, and we have placed the sensors on the map in such a way that they will be placed in the real scenario, okay? And on the left-hand side, you can see a lot of information like network information, devices and objects. So you can do different kind of configuration for each of the sensors. So you could make the simulation as close to real as possible. You could give the energy consumption pattern for each of the sensors. You could give what will be the data that will be sensed by the sensors. All those details can be given, right? So first thing we did is we modeled the entire, we modeled this architecture using CupCarbon, okay? Once we did that, the next step was to get the data to perform learning and to implement the system, right? But before that, the question that you might have is, how do you implement MAPE, right? Because so far I've been just talking about, there is a MAPE loop, it performs this, it does that, and all those details. But the real question, I think there was a question that someone asked me, Karthik, okay, you're talking about this MAPE framework, but how do you really implement a MAPE, right? So this is one of the way of implementing a MAPE, okay? So what we did is we followed a Lambda architecture, which is a kind of a big data architectural pattern, where you have a system in the first layer. So you can see we model the system in CupCarbon. So this is the system that you see. And then you have a data ingestion layer. What it does is it takes the data from the system layer or the CupCarbon. It keeps streaming the data to an Apache Kafka, okay, which is a data producer. So what is Apache Kafka? Apache Kafka is a technology that was released by, initially by LinkedIn in 2011 because their notification service was failing. So they came up with this idea of something called something called Apache Kafka, which is a type of publish subscribe architecture. So what it allows is it allows you to perform real-time, it allows you to give real-time notification as well as it allows you to perform processing of data in real time, okay? So we have a data producer which uses Apache Kafka, and it sends the data in real time to 2 different activities. So what you see in data ingestion is actually the monitor activity of the make-k loop. Okay. Now, once the monitoring is done, then you have a real-time phase. And this is where the data processor and the predictor is there. So this represents the analyze activity. Okay. So in real time, you have a data processor, which is another Apache Kafka consumer. It consumes the data in real time from the producer. Okay. And then it takes the data, it performs some kind of processing, and then it sends to a quality of service predictor. So this was implemented using Python, which is a component that which has a machine learning model. It takes the data, performs the prediction, and sends to a decision maker component. Okay. So this is about the real-time phase. Now the batch phase is where the real thing happens, right? So this is the machine learning engine. So in the batch phase, again, we have a data store similar to what we saw here, right? So if you see this diagram, there is a data store. Okay. So similarly, in the batch phase, you have a data store, which we use Elasticsearch. Okay. So it is one of the well-known document database, which can store data as a JSON. So we have an Elasticsearch where we store all the data. Okay. Then we have a Keras-based LSTM model generator component, which generates an LSTM network. Okay. So it takes the data, it performs the training, and then sends to a model evaluator component, which is then sent to the models, right? So this is exactly in line with what I was showing here, right? So it sends to the ML models repository, and you can see there is a model builder component and a model evaluator component. So it's the same thing, but I'm just representing it using technologies, right? So for the model evaluator, again, we used a simple Python, and all the models were stored as a file, in a file system. So it was just a traditional file system that we used, okay? So batch is something that happens periodically, and real time is something that happens in real time. Okay, so as soon as the system produces some kind of quality of service data, immediately it is streamed to a data producer, immediately it is sent to a data processor, which consumes the data, then it makes predictions, then it decides if an adaptation has to be done. If an adaptation has to be done, then it is sent to an executor component. So an executor component is a Java-based component, and it performs adaptation on Carbon. Okay. Okay, so, and then also we have something called a presentation layer where we use Kibana. It's a very nice interface. If you have not used it, go give a try. It is from the group of Elasticsearch. So what they do is they allow you to create very nice interactive dashboards based on the data that you have in Elasticsearch. Okay. So this is again the technology that we used. We used Python, we used Java, we used Apache Kafka, Keras, and Elasticsearch. So these were the technologies used. And Carbon was used for simulating the IoT system. So when I say execution or when I say adaptation, what kind of adaptation we were performing? So we were performing a simple adaptation in the scenario, right? So here what we did is, whenever we feel that the energy consumption of the sensor is going above a threshold, we simply reduce the data transfer frequency, right? So one of the simplest way to perform an adaptation in an IoT scenario, if you want to save energy, is to reduce communication, okay? Because communication consumes the most amount of energy in IoT device, right? So we just reduce the frequency with which a device communicates to the database. This is what we did, okay? But we predict, we make predictions, we check if a sensor is going to consume more energy. If it is going to consume more energy, then we just simply reduce the frequency of communication, okay? So this is the adaptation that we did. Now let us go to the experiments and evaluation part. So before I go with that, let me check the answers. Okay, 10 people have answered. That's great. So probably I think those will be the 10 that will give the answer for the other question as well. So yes, this answer is correct. So predicting with good accuracy is extremely hard in the case of proactive adaptation. And that is why we are coming up with something like a deep neural network to ensure that this accuracy can be guaranteed as much as possible, right? So thank you for giving the right answer. I'm happy that every one of you understood the concept in a very clear way. Okay, so the experiments and evaluation, the goal of the experiment is to improve the energy efficiency of the sensors in the NDR system, okay? So we model the NDR system here. Now our goal is to ensure that all the sensors are energy efficient, okay? So what we did for this, we first simulated the system for a period of 30 days, okay? And when we did it, we got a data of around 3.5 GB. And during the simulation, we continuously varied the data frequency. So we varied it randomly so that we can capture all the different types of energy consumption patterns when the frequency changes, okay? Then we deployed everything in a computing cluster with 4 nodes, because we have this, we have this big things like Apache Kafka, and then we need Elasticsearch, and you have to have Kibana, then Carbon. So all this were deployed in different computing nodes. In a cluster of 4 computing nodes, and Carbon was run on a desktop machine, right? Because we wanted to simulate the edge scenario. So the edge is a thing with a limited amount of resources. So CupCarbon was run on a small desktop computer. And the main experiment, so once we simulated for 30 days, we used this data to create LSTM models, okay? The forecasting models. Once we had the models ready, then we performed another experiment, which was run for a period of 24 hours to see how good was the model, right? Again, so the two things which I said in the initial part of the research question is, how do you decide how ahead you need to forecast? So this is called a forecast horizon. So how far you need to forecast, okay? And then how frequently you need to forecast. And this is called a decision period, right? Then for the experimental setup, what we did is we created three set of decision period. One is short, medium, and large, okay? And for each decision period, we created different horizons. We said, what will happen if you use a short decision period and a short horizon of 5 minutes, okay? Similarly, what will happen if you use a short decision period with 10-minute horizon? So similarly, we did this different, different set of horizons and decision period to understand what will be the best decision period and horizon if you want to perform a proactive adaptation, right? Okay, so this is about the experiment and evaluation setup. The next thing we want to understand is what kind of metrics did we use. So we used three important metrics. So these are the metrics that were suggested by the International Journal of Time Series Forecasting. They conduct something called a time series forecasting challenge every year. And they have these three important metrics. One is the root mean square error. I know that most of you might know it. So this is just about the difference between the predicted value and the actual value, the squared mean of the predicted value and the actual value, right? Then you have the scaled mean average percentage error, which gives you the percentage of the errors that you have in the prediction with respect to the actual values. Then you have something called mean absolute scaled error. This is about how good is your approach with respect to a naive baseline. So a naive baseline in this case of a time series forecast is the I-1 value will determine the ith value, right? So you simply use the same value that you have in I-1 for ith value. So this is the simple naive approach for time series forecasting. So how good is your approach with respect to a simple baseline is determined by this metric called mean absolute scaled error, right? So these are the different metrics that we used. The next thing that we need to understand is how good was the forecast accuracy. So the three graph shows the actual the actual versus forecast values for different horizons. The first graph is for the horizon of 10. The second graph is for a horizon of 15. The third graph is for a horizon of 30. Okay. So what we do here is we predict the values, then we check how good it is with the actual values. So you can see that the RMSE value in each of the cases is very low, which is like 0.67, 0.70, and 0.81. And you could see that the forecast value is able to follow the actual values, right? So this was a proof that our approach was working really well, irrespective of the horizons we used. You should remember 10 minutes means essentially we are predicting the next 10 time steps. 15 means we are predicting 15 time steps, and 30 means we are predicting the next 30 time steps, okay? So the accuracy is really good, as well as the stability across different horizons was not bad, because if you see, it was 0.67 to 0.81. It's not much a big difference, but comparatively you have moved from horizon of 10 to horizon of 30, okay? By the way, all the source code and data is available in this Git link. So if you want to explore how to do this kind of activities, you can simply go to the GitHub link. You have all the instructions there. You can set up the experiment and you can run it, okay? Okay, so this was a really good result. Then what we did, we compared it with all the different time series approaches that we have, okay? So again, this was recommended by the International Journal of Time Series Forecasting. So they say about 10 different baselines that we need to use if you want to come up with a new approach for performing the forecast, right? So we have used all the 10 different baselines. And you could see here that LSTM is able to perform really well, and it is able to give really low values across different metrics, okay? So if you see, the percentage of errors is like 2% errors, right? But you can see with other approaches, not the case. And with other approaches, you could also see a pattern that as the horizon increases from 10 to 15 to 30, the performance become worse and worse of each of the other approaches, okay? But in the case of LSTM, it is not so, okay? That is because of the ability of the deep neural network to understand the relationship between the different features of the data and to perform predictions with good accuracy, right? Okay, so that was about accuracy and stability. The next important question is, how much energy did the approach save? Okay, So for this, what we did is we created an approach called NoAdap, which performs adaptation, which does not perform any adaptation, right? So it simply runs, okay? So it is just a basic run of the IoT system. Then we had a reactive baseline, which performs the adaptation only when the energy of a sensor exceeds a particular threshold, okay? Then we have the different proactive approaches, because we need to identify which is the best prediction horizon. So we have proactive 5, proactive 10, proactive 15, and proactive 30, which means that, so for example, proactive 5 means the prediction is done for the next 5 minutes, okay? So similarly, we did for each of the approach, and we could see that among these approaches, proactive 10 performed the best. It was able to save the most amount of energy consumption in the given IoT system, okay? Next thing is, the biggest question that you should ask me is, okay, Karthik, you are saying about the proactive approaches, you are saying about the horizons, but what about the decision period? How frequently are you forecasting, right? So that is where what we did is, we created the decision period called small, medium, and large, and we computed how much energy is saved by each of the proactive approaches when using when using different decision periods, okay? So for example, in the case of proactive 5, I've not denoted the goal, but the goal is like the energy consumption should not exceed 5 joules every 5 minutes, okay? And you could see all of the approaches were not performing well. All the approaches, these are box plots, right? So the mean value, the median value is always above the 5 joules. So this is not good, okay? Then when you go to the proactive 10, the goal was to maintain energy consumption at 10 joules, okay, every 10 minutes. So in the case of proactive 10, this approach, which is using large decision period, was performing fairly better than the other approaches. Now we go to proactive 15. Again, the energy consumption limit was 15 joules, and you could see that pretty much all the approaches goes above, but in the case of large decision period, it was able to still stay, right? Most of the values were still below the threshold. In the case of proactive 30, it was good because 30 was the limit, and again, large decision period was giving you the best optimal value, okay? So the important thing that we need to understand, the first thing is use intermediate horizon. So don't use something like 5 or don't use something like 30, because 30 can be the worst, because you are predicting for the next 30 time steps, and 5 means you are predicting for short intervals. When you are predicting for short intervals, sometimes you don't have enough data to predict for the small intervals. So that is why it's always good to go for an intermediate horizon, something like 10, where you have enough time to check, like for the last 10 minutes what happened, and then predict for the next 10 minutes, okay? So that's why I say use intermediate horizon, not too short and not too long, okay? So that was the basic conclusion that we had from the approach. Okay, so the next thing that we wanted to say is how efficient is the approach, right? So how efficient is the approach is determined by how much time the approach takes to perform an adaptation and how frequently the adaptation was performed. Why this is important? Let's say that your approach is performing adaptation every 1 minute, right? That is not good, because every 1 minute, essentially, you might stop the system, or you might change the execution pattern of the system, which is not good. So you want your approach not just to be effective, it also has to be efficient with respect to the number of adaptations performed and the average time taken to perform each single adaptation, right? So in our case, I'm not going to explain this graph, but just to say that the approach was really efficient with respect to the adaptation count, and the average time taken to perform the adaptation was just around 0.20 seconds, right? So not more than that. So if you see this diagram, the entire flow from carbon to perform execution was happening in like 0.20 seconds. And this was because thanks to Apache Kafka, it was able to ingest data in real time, and we were using some kind of very good computing technologies like Elasticsearch with the help of machine learning models that were already created. And this allowed us to scale up to even higher components and perform adaptations in real time. So 0.20 second was the time taken from carbon to the execution, right? So that is the efficiency of the approach, and that ends the approach for the first research question. So we have come to a conclusion that now we know that we can perform proactive adaptations. Now we know that how frequently we need to forecast. We also know how far ahead we need to forecast. So these were the answers answered by the first research question. Now we are going to the second research question, which is about how can machine learning be used to continuously improve the adaptation process. Now, why this is important? This is important because in the first research question, I was only saying that, okay, you foresee that something is going to happen, you perform the adaptation. Okay, but again, every time something happens, you are going to perform an adaptation. In the sense, every time you foresee there is going to be a problem, you are going to perform an adaptation. But the system is not learning from the adaptation itself. It is just again adapting. It is using machine learning technique to predict, but it is not using machine learning to learn by itself, right? It will be clear with the next slides, but this is the idea. The idea is that how can machine learning be used to also continuously improve the adaptation process itself, right? Not just for prediction, but also to improve the adaptation process. Okay. So this is what we are going to see in the second research question. So, but before that, I think probably it's time to go for the next. Okay, so this is the second question. What types of data is handled well by an RNN? Okay. So people can start giving their answers. By the time they give, I'll again go to the next question. Okay, how can machine learning be used to continuously improve the adaptation process? Okay, so here we are moving from, we are not moving from reactive to proactive, but we are moving from proactive approach to proactive learning enabled approach flow. Okay, so what you see on the left is a proactive approach flow. So what we already saw, right? We collect the data, we analyze the data, we generate forecast, we check if there is going to be any possible violation. If yes, then we identify an adaptation plan and we execute it. Okay, but we are moving from this to a learning enabled approach. So what does a learning enabled approach do? Okay, you can see we are adding more activities. So we check, we generate forecast, we check if there is going to be any possible violation. Then what do you do is important. Then what do? You check if it is the first run of the approach. If it is the first time the approach is running, then it means that the system does not have any previous knowledge, right? So it simply identifies an adaptation plan and it executes it. If it is not the first run of the approach, or if it is not the first time a system is adapting, it gets the feedback of the previous decision, it learns from the feedback, and then it identifies an adaptation plan. Now, this is really important. The three boxes here are really important. What I'm trying to say is that we are not just forecasting again, right? Once we forecast, we identify if it is the first time the system is seeing such an error, or if it is the first time the system is seeing such an issue. If it is seeing it for the first time, of course, yes, identify some adaptation plan and do it. But if it is not seeing for the first time, understand what it did in the previous instance, okay? Learn from it, and then come up with a new adaptation plan, okay? This is similar to what human beings do, right? Every time we are put into a situation, our brain does like this, right? If we have faced a similar situation in the past, we'll try to learn from it. We'll see, okay, what did I do in the last time and what I don't want to do, right? Based on that, we'll do something, right? But if it is the first time that we are facing a situation, we might not know, right? We'll try to ask others, okay, you know what, I'm stuck in this situation, can you please help me, right? But if we already know, we'll try to use our learning, right? So why can't we put this in the system? Okay, this is the idea behind this approach, okay? So that is the entire objective behind research question 2, okay? But before I go for that, I need to explain something really important. Because I say here, get the feedback of the previous decision, perform learning, identify an adaptation plan, okay? The question is, okay, Karthik, what kind of machine learning can be used here, okay? And this is an important question because you cannot do this offline, okay? You have to do it in real time, okay? So you cannot use kind of a supervised machine learning techniques because you need to train the model and it will take a lot of time, okay? You cannot use, again, unsupervised learning because even that will need time for performing the training, right? So the best option here is then why don't we use reinforcement learning? Because that's how human beings learn, right? We make errors and we learn from it, right? Of course, we are not just using reinforcement learning. We'll be using reinforcement learning, supervised learning as human beings, right? But similarly, why can't we use reinforcement learning for system? Why can't the system just learn on the fly? So whenever it makes a mistake, it learns from it immediately. How can you do that? That is where something like Q-learning can be of use, okay? So let me just give a brief explanation of what is Q-learning. I'm not going to go into the details, but just to give a crux of what is Q-learning, right? So Q-learning is also called quality learning, okay? Many people don't know this because Q stands for quality, okay? Q-learning is also known as quality learning, and it is a class of reinforcement learning technique, okay? The biggest advantage, or the first and primary advantage of Q-learning, is that it is a model-free learning technique, okay? So when it is model-free, it means that it does not use any machine learning model. It just learns then and there based on the instantaneous feedback it receives by performing an action, okay? So let us see the image here, right? So the agent is anything. It can be a computer program or the process that wants to learn. Okay, the agent performs an action. Okay, on the environment. So environment is anything where the program wants to learn from, right? So it can be, in our case, it can be the place in which the IoT systems are deployed. It could be the feedback that it gets based on the forecast that was performed and all those details, right? It could be anything, the environment. So the agent performs an action, it affects the environment, and whenever it performs an action, it gets a reward. The reward can be a positive reward or a negative reward. If it is a positive reward, it means agent did the right action. If it is a negative reward, it means the agent did a very bad action. Okay. Similarly, based on the reward, the agent will keep learning how to improve its action. Okay. And whenever it performs an action, the agent moves from one state to another. Okay. So this is the simplest, a diagram that you could see anywhere about a reinforcement learning technique in general or Q-learning in particular. Okay. And this is used in robotics, in autonomous vehicles. The deep Q-learning version is used in AlphaGo game that recently was able to, I think, beat the perfect Go player like 4 or 5 years back, right? So why it is used in robotics? Q-learning is something that is used in robotics for robots to learn how to walk or how to navigate a space. So what the robot does is it just keeps moving through a space. Whenever it hits the obstacle, it learns that, okay, that was an obstacle. Then it again comes back to the first position. Then it again starts walking. Okay. Similarly, it will learn automatically to navigate through a space. Okay. So this is done by Q-learning. So I know that this can be difficult. So that's why I have an example here, right? So let us think about this scenario. Okay, so the environment is the space in which there is a robot. Okay, so this robot is the agent, and this robot can perform two actions. Okay, so there is a fire on one side, and there is a bucket with there is a tap. So there is this bucket filled with water. Okay, now either the agent can take this bucket and pour it on the fire, or the agent can directly go to the fire. Okay. But the agent does not know, because it is using Q-learning. It does not have any idea of the environment, right? It is just put in an environment, and it knows that it can perform two different actions. Okay, and it does not know which action is good, and it is going to learn. So how does it learn? Is it first goes to the fire, probably, right? It might even go to the water. It first goes to the fire, then it understands, okay, it is not good because maybe it felt the heat, right? There was a sudden heat in the metal, so it understood that, okay, this is not good. And then it receives a reward of -50, right? Which means that the action was bad. Next time, what do is it understands, okay, this is a bad action and I need to avoid it next time. Okay. And the next time, if you ask the agent to do something, it won't go directly to the fire. Instead, it will go to the water. Okay. So this is the simplest example of how Q-learning works. Okay. It performs an action, the agent, which can be a robot, or it can be a program, or it can be a process, or it can be anything that wants to learn. It performs an action. It understands how good the action was, and based on the feedback, it improves. Okay, so this is the simplest idea behind Q-learning. So that's what you see here, right? The first step is observe. Okay, so observe the environment, select an action using a policy. So the policy here, initially there will be nothing, right? So you just select some random action. Then based on the action, you get a reward or a penalty, right? And then based on the penalty or reward, you update the policy. You understand that, okay, you know what, next time when I have fire and water, I should not go first to the fire. That will be the policy, right? Initially, you don't have any policy, but after the first action, you will understand the first policy, right? Similarly, you keep doing this loop continuously till you find the optimal policy, right? So this is the basic idea behind Q-learning. And in Q-learning, the learning strategy is nothing but a trade-off or a balance between exploration and exploitation. Okay, there are two different words. One is exploration, which is the agent initially does not know what are the possible actions it can perform, right? So it just keeps performing some actions, and it keeps understanding how good the action is. On this phase is called exploration. Okay, once it keeps performing this for some time, after some time, the robot would have learned how good was each action. Okay? And at that time, the robot needs to start learning from each of the action. And this is called the exploitation phase, where the robot starts exploiting the knowledge that it has got from the actions it made previously. Okay, so this is, and in a good reinforcement learning algorithm, you need to have a very good balance between exploration and exploitation. Okay, that's why I said the learning strategy is something where the robot or the agent tries to balance between the exploration phase and the exploitation phase. Okay, so that was about Q-learning. Okay, so Just to give a basic idea, the major concepts is first you have an agent. So the agent can be a process or a program which has to learn. The environment can be the space, the system, or the world with which the agent interacts, right? The states, the set of state that the agent can get into with respect to the environment. For example, here, the states can be that the robot moves to position 1, the robot moves to position 2, and so on and so forth, okay? Then actions are the set of actions the agent can take. So here the actions are either it goes to the fire or it goes to the water, right? Then you have something called a reward, which is the value or the feedback obtained by the agent for performing an action, okay? And then final one important thing which I have not said is something called a Q table, okay? So the question can be, how does the agent know, right? How does the agent remember what it did? So this is something that the agent uses. It's called a Q table. So Q table is nothing but a simple n by m table, okay, where n represents the number of states and m represents the number of actions, okay, where each value is a s comma a state comma action pair, okay, that denotes the relevance of performing an action from a given state. So every time an agent reaches a state S, it checks the Q table to understand which action is the best, okay? And the best action is determined by the maximum reward, okay? So similarly, so every step the agent goes, reaches a state, understands, okay, which is the best action that I can take based on the Q table, then it takes the action. And this is how the learning works. Okay, so maybe I think I'll just go back to the question here. Okay, so I see 6 people have said sequential data, which is right answer, and 1 person has said image data. Okay, image data is not very well handled by recurrent neural network, and that is why the entire concept of convolution neural network came in, right? Recurrent neural network is more for data with sequential nature because of the way in which the neural network is structured. But for image data, you have like tremendous amount of number of pixels, and there are a lot of features. And that is why convolution neural network can really help, because it has this convolution process followed by a filtering process, which allows you to reduce the dimensionality on the fly, right? Okay, so uh, before I go to the next question, I think maybe at this point we can take a break, because I think now it's 1 hour. I was having a timer, so maybe we can take a break for 10 minutes or 5 minutes, and then I can resume for the next part. What do you suggest? Hello, ma'am. So
Yes, sir.
yeah, can we take a break for 5 minutes?
Yes, sir. Definitely, definitely, you can, sir.
Okay, perfect. And then we'll resume back so that people won't get too much bored, right? So we'll take a
Oh,
5 minute break. Okay.
okay, sir. Okay,
Okay.
sir.
Yeah. Hi all. So shall we start? Okay, so I got a yes. So that means everyone are agreeing. So I'm going to start. Okay. Okay, so the next thing, okay, so till now I was discussing about what is Q learning, what are the major concepts behind Q learning, right? So the next thing is how can we improve the approach to support this kind of learning, right? So if you see this image, it's same as the previous image, but it has subtle differences. First thing is, if you see the plan activity, we have a decision maker, but this time the decision maker is not a simple program, but it uses Q learning, okay? And then on the knowledge base, you can see something called a plan repository, okay? The plan repository consists of multiple adaptation plans, and the objective of the Q learning is to select one of the plan based on the feedback it obtains from every forecast, okay? So every time what happens is, the monitor activity gets the quality of service data, sends to analyze activity, similar to what we saw in the previous approach, makes the prediction, sends the prediction to the plan activity. Now the plan activity uses Q learning, selects one of the plan based on from the plan repository, And this will be then sent to the execute activity and the adaptation is performed. Now, during the next adaptation cycle, the plan activity which uses Q-learning gets the forecast, and this forecast will be treated as the feedback for the action performed in the previous adaptation cycle. Okay, so every time it performs an adaptation, the forecast that it obtains in the next adaptation cycle will be used as the feedback. Okay, so this is called delayed feedback in Q-learning. I'm not going into details of it, but this is how the Q-learning improves continuously. And the actions it performs are basically selecting of one of the plans from the plan repository. Okay. So this is the approach that was published in the International Conference on Smart Computing, which was held in, I think, Italy last year. So the paper is titled Leveraging Machine Learning Techniques for Architecting Self-Adaptive IoT Systems. Okay. So when I say plans, what kind of adaptation plans are there, right? So what we use in this work is we use 3 different plans. Okay, these 3 different plans are based on something called architectural patterns for self-adaptation. So 3 different architectural patterns for self-adaptation, particularly in IoT system, was proposed by Musil et al. Okay, in 2017. So intuitively, you can think of these 3 patterns as edge, cloud, and fog. Okay, so the first one is more like an edge scenario where the IoT sensors have the ability to perform the computing, and then they send the data to a database. Okay, the second scenario is like a cloud scenario where the IoT system, they do not have any computing capability. They just send the data to a central server where there will be a database and there will be some other processing units. The third pattern is called collect organize or CO pattern, and it is very similar to a fog. Okay, the sensors will send the data to an intermediary server, and then this will be sending the data to the database. Okay, so the question here is, how can we move in runtime between these patterns so that we can maintain different types of quality of service parameters? Okay, so just to give an example, so what you see in this 2 graph are the energy consumed as well as the data traffic of the IoT system when using different patterns. Okay, so you can see that on the energy consumed graph, you can see that collect organize or the CO pattern consumes the least amount of energy. Okay, and SU pattern, which is the synthesize utilize, which is nothing but the edge pattern, consumes the most amount of energy because the sensors are performing the computation, and hence it is trivial that they are going to consume the most amount of energy. And SC is somehow intermediate between the 2. Okay, now this is not the case with data traffic. With data traffic, you have most number of traffic generated in collect organize. Why? Because it is very similar to a fog. So you have to send the data to a controller, then the controller has sent the data to the database. Okay, so there is additional data traffic communication that happens. Now, in the case of SU, which consumes the most amount of energy, it does not consume that many amount of data traffic. Okay, so you could clearly see that whatever consumes the highest energy on one side might not consume or might not have the largest amount of data traffic on the other side. Okay, so how do you balance between these 2 quality of service parameters? Okay, so this is the challenge that we are addressing in this work. Okay, so what you see as the dotted line here is the limit. Okay, so this you can consider as the goal, that the sensor should not consume more than 10 joules every 10 minutes. Okay, and here you have data traffic, right? So you have a higher limit as well as a lower limit. So you don't want the system to consume more than 3,000 messages every 10 minutes. You don't want the system to have less than 2,600 messages every 10 minutes. Okay, so you want the system to be in between this, and you want the system to be below this energy level of threshold. Okay, so how do you balance these 2 parameters is something that we are going to see in this approach. Okay, so what we are doing. So here I was saying about the fact that we are using Q-learning, and I was saying that decision maker will use Q-learning, right? So how does the decision maker work? So the decision maker can be treated as the agent here. Okay, it is very similar to the diagram I was showing about the Q-learning like a couple of slides back. So here, decision maker becomes the agent, and the action it performs is to switch to a pattern. So we have 3 patterns. So at any point, it can switch to one of the pattern. And this pattern is then applied to the IoT system. This means that once the pattern is applied, the system will move from one state to another, which will be determined by the energy and the data traffic it consumes. Okay, so for example, the states can be high energy, high data traffic. It means that the system is consuming large amount of energy and large amount of data traffic. Another state can be low energy and low data traffic. Similarly, you can have different combination of states. Okay, so based on the action performed, the IoT system can go into one of the states. Okay, and then based on the action performed, you will get the quality of service forecast in the next interval. For example, let's imagine that the decision maker says, I want to switch to pattern collect organize or a fog pattern. Okay, now the IoT system moves from the pattern to a fog pattern. Now in the next forecast, the decision maker will receive how good was the previous decision. For example, let's imagine that decision maker selects the fog pattern because it wanted to reduce the energy consumption. And let's imagine that after the pattern was applied, the energy consumption reduces. This means that the action applied was really good and it gets a positive reward. But if the forecast says that the energy consumption increases, then it means that the decision selected was bad. Then it gets a penalty. So this allows the decision maker component to improve continuously, right? So again, just to give a brief idea here, the states is nothing but the combination of the quality of service states. It is based on the forecast and the patterns, as I was explaining. Actions can be switching to different patterns. Rewards is nothing but a mapping that you give for the IoT system to reach to every state. Okay, so if you reach probably a high energy state, you will give a penalty, right? If you reach a low energy state, you will give a positive reward. So that is the reward. Then Q table, as I was saying, is an N by M matrix with state action pairs S, A. Okay? So this is the overall idea of the decision maker component and how it uses Q learning. Okay, so there is a big algorithm here, and I don't want to go through this algorithm now, but just for the sake of completion, I was showing this. So this is the algorithm that we used to perform this kind of switch between the adaptation patterns. But what you see on the right is something interesting, right? So here you can consider the system like a robot that has to move through a grid, okay? And the grid is nothing but a set of quality of service states. So different states like high energy, high data traffic. So EQ2 denotes high energy, low data traffic. EQ3 denotes high energy, high data traffic. So the system has to navigate through the grid such that it always goes to a position where the energy consumed is low and the data traffic is in between the two limits that I was showing. Okay, so this was just to give an intuitive idea of how the approach works. Okay, so again, the next part was to evaluate how good was our approach. So in this case, the objective was to improve the energy efficiency of the sensor nodes in the NDR system while maintaining the data traffic. So in the previous experiment, it was just about energy efficiency, but in this experiment, it is both about energy efficiency as well as data traffic. So what did we do? We first collected the data because we wanted the system to perform forecast of not just energy consumption, but we also wanted the system to forecast the data traffic. Okay, so we simulated the system for a period of 10 days. And during the simulation, we continuously varied the patterns. So we dynamically changed the patterns randomly so that we could collect all the type of variations that could happen in a real-time scenario. Okay, then we define a set of threshold. So HE denotes the maximum energy that the system can consume. LE denotes the minimum energy the system could go into. HD denotes the higher data traffic limit. LD denotes the lower data traffic limit. And we use the prediction horizon of 10 minutes. So this is based on the previous experimental result, right? So we are going to predict for every 10 minutes. We again deployed it in the computing cluster of 4 nodes, and we created a 3-day data set for each of the patterns as validation sets, but this is not something important with respect to the talk I'm giving today. Then the final experiment was executed again for a period of 24 hours. Okay. Now, the first thing again was to check how good was the forecast accuracy and stability. So what you see on the left is the forecast of the energy consumption, and what you see on the right is the forecast of the data traffic. And here we used normalized root mean square error because we wanted, so energy consumption is in the scale of, let's say 0 to 20, and data traffic is in the scale of, let's say 1000 to 5000, right? So we wanted to have them comparable, so we used normalized root mean square error. And we could see that the value were like 0.87 and 0.90, which is really good. And it was able to prove that our approach is not just good for forecasting energy consumption as well as good for forecasting data traffic. Okay. So once we did that, the next thing we wanted to check was, what about the energy and data traffic saved, right? So what we did, we checked for each of the patterns. We ran the approach for a period of 24 hours, and we computed the energy consumed, the data traffic, the number of data traffic that was incurred, the limit, the threshold exceedances of max DE. So max DE means that how many times the approach exceeded the data traffic limit. Min DE means how many times the approach went below the data traffic limit. Max EE means how many times the approach made the system go above the energy consumption limit, right? So when we were using CO, the energy consumption was very less. There was no exceedances. You could see 0, 0, right? Then you had SU, then you had SC, but you can see in our case, this was less. For overall, it was less. For example, in CO, the max DE was 90, but in our approach, it was 18, right? So similarly, for the other approach, you could see that our approach was to give a good trade-off between energy consumption and data traffic. This is denoted in the graph, right? So if you see the bar plot, you could see that CO consumes very less amount of energy, but the data traffic is very high. In the case of SU, the energy consumption is very high, but the data traffic is low. SC, the energy is high, the data traffic is not that good, but not that bad. But in the case of our approach, it was able to balance both, right? So here, what you can essentially see is Q-learning is able to effectively learn continuously how to balance between different quality of service parameter and to provide a good trade-off between different quality of service attributes, right? So what we could again see was there was a continuous improvement of adaptation, because every time the system is performing the adaptation, it is learning how to improve itself from the forecast that it receives as the feedback, okay? And we could also see that the energy and data traffic saved was improved with every adaptation interval. This is because we are using reinforcement learning, and the system could continuously learn with every adaptation performed. Now, just to give the adaptation count and time again, just like the previous slide, we wanted to compute the efficiency. So the adaptation time taken was 0.23 seconds, which was additional of 0.03 seconds compared to the previous approach. That is because you have a reinforcement learning, which uses a Q table, and there is a lookup time for that, okay? And in that 0.13 seconds was taken by the adaptation executor, which has to execute the adaptation, and the execution has to happen through a network, okay, through HTTP. So that was consuming most of the time. Okay, so that was related to the second research question. So before I move on, let us go to menti.com and let us see if we have a question, right? Okay, so from here, I think we'll have a quiz, I guess. Okay, so what is the specialty of Q-learning? Okay. So I don't see people logging in. Oh, maybe the time was very less. Okay. 2. Yeah, I'm sorry for the others. I think we had only, okay. Okay, so it learns faster is not the real specialty of Q-learning. The specialty of Q-learning is it is model-free. Actually, it does not learn fast, because I said there is a big trade-off between exploration and exploitation. It does not learn fast. It can give output fast. That is the idea, right? It is actually model-free. That is the important part, because Q-learning does not use any machine learning model, right? It might not learn fast. It may learn fast. It may learn slow, but that depends. But the important point is that it is model-free learning technique, right? So it does not require any model. It just learns on the fly, okay? So that is the most specialty of Q-learning. And that is why Q-learning is preferred in many scenarios where you have to have strong reinforcement learning techniques. So one of the variations that you can see in recent days is the deep Q-learning, which uses a combination of convolution neural network and Q-learning. Okay. Okay, so I'll just go to the slide now. Okay, so now the crucial challenge that we have with machine learning, right, is that machine learning is not always right. Okay? Because we always go with the hype, right? Every day we say, okay, why don't we use machine learning? Why can't we just use some kind of machine learning? Although this is true, in reality, if you see industries, they are not always going for machine learning as a go-to solution. They will check if machine learning is really feasible and really needed, because machine learning can produce very bad decision, which can sometimes even cause death of a person. Why I'm saying this? You could see 3 important clippings from news that I have put here, okay? The first thing is Tesla needs to fix its deadly autopilot problem, right? So what happened is, in like 2 years back in 2018, when Tesla model was released, there was one driver who was driving the car, okay? And what happened? During the drive, he switched to the autopilot mode, and he was just sitting, right? And the car was driving automatically. And because it recognized, it uses some kind of machine learning algorithm, of course, and it didn't recognize a divider, okay? It didn't recognize that there was a divider in between the road, and it just crashed into the divider and the person died. Okay, and the investigation is still going on. Okay, then you have another news here from MIT Technology Review, which says AI is sending people to jail and getting it wrong. Okay, this is because I think in maybe I think it was in San Francisco or California that they have the system where the judge uses artificial intelligence to see if a criminal is really a criminal or not. Okay, and what happened was, strangely, due to some reasons, it was considering all the people of, let's say, black ethnicity as, people who have done crime, and it was automatically sending them to jail. Okay, and then there was a big protest. It was like, no, this person is actually good, but because the AI had most of the images from a particular ethnic group, it felt that okay, all the people who belong to that community are criminals. Okay, so this was one of the biggest blunder, and they had to shut down the system. And another one here you can see, AI camera operator reportedly confuses bald head for soccer ball during live stream. So this is a very funny incident that happened in November. So in one of the football broadcasting, what they did was, instead of using a person for moving the camera in a football stadium, they used an AI, and the AI was supposed to automatically move the camera so that the audience will be able to see the correct view of the football match. But what happened was AI mistakenly took that the head of the referee, who was a bald guy, is a football, and it was only moving with the movement of the referee. And most of the time, the referee was standing at one position. So the AI camera thought that it was the ball, and it was just focusing that person, right? So this is again funny, and there are also some serious issues, like I was saying. So AI cannot always be right. It can make blunders, right? So how do you ensure that whatever decision that machine learning produces is not wrong, right? How can you give guarantees to the decision produced by machine learning? So this is the biggest question, and this is one of the biggest challenge that the community is trying to address as a whole on how to improve robustness of machine learning techniques. Okay. Okay, so here is where something like quantitative verification can be of big help. Okay, and this is something as a research that we have started now recently, and I would say that it's a research of huge potential, because quantitative verification basically means it is a set of formal techniques, okay, probabilistic model checking techniques that allows the verification of systems that exhibit stochastic behavior. Okay, so any system that exhibits a probabilistic behavior can be verified using quantitative verification techniques to check if the system is satisfying certain properties or not. Okay, so how do you do that? You convert a system to a model. The model can be nothing but a DTMC or a CTMC model. So it can be a discrete time Markov chain or a continuous time Markov chain. Okay, so discrete time Markov chain is used in scenarios where you know that there is a discrete time step, and in every discrete time step, there is a kind of transition that happens in the system. But whereas in a case of a IoT system, you cannot say that the time step is always discrete. So you go for continuous time Markov chains. Okay. So you have on one side system, and the system can be converted to a model, which can be a DTMC or a CTMC. And then on the other side, you have requirements, right? So the requirements is nothing but the system has to satisfy certain kind of properties, like the system has to ensure that the energy consumption is below this. The system has to ensure that the number of messages are not above something or not below something. So all those properties can be specified. So to specify the property, you can either use a PCTL, which is probabilistic control tree logic, or a continuous stochastic logic. So these are two different types of logical formulas that you could use. But I mean, of course, there are more languages that you could use to specify this kind of properties. And once you have the model and the specification, you send it to a model checking engine, which what it does is it takes the model, it takes the properties, and if it checks if the system is able to satisfy the properties. Okay, and it gives three different types of results. First is give the verification results. Verification results says if the system satisfies the properties. For example, if the given IoT system satisfies the property that the energy consumption is less than 10 joules or not. So this can be verification results. Then there is something called quantitative results, which says how much will be the energy consumed by the system, right? For example. Then it could also give counter example. It can say how the system could reduce the energy consumption, okay, based on the model of the system. So these are the three different outputs that you can get from a quantitative verification process. It's a very exhaustive process. So just to give an intuitive idea, what it does is it creates a model. So model is nothing but it's like there will be states and there will be actions, and movement from one state to another is based on something called a probabilistic transition. And once you have all the different possibilities, during the model checking, the system will go through each and every path to check if the system is satisfying the property or not. So it's a very exhaustive process and takes a lot of time to complete. Okay. And that is an advantage because it goes through all the path and checks if the system is satisfying a property or not. And it is a disadvantage because if the system is really huge enough, you could run into exponential time problem, and you cannot even perform verification. Okay, because the state space can simply explode. So the question is then how to guarantee the quality of adaptation performed by the machine learning process and how the guarantee can help machine learning. So we understood what is quantitative verification. Now we are going to apply quantitative verification along with machine learning to ensure that whatever machine learning produces is right. Okay. So here what we do is we just simply add one more step to the previous figure I was showing in the previous approach. So what you do is once you identify the adaptation plan, we verify the adaptation plan. So for verifying the adaptation plan, we use quantitative verification techniques. We check if the adaptation plan is good or bad. If it is bad, we again go back, get the feedback of the previous decision, perform the learning, identify the plan, and again go back to the same loop. Okay. If the plan is good, then you execute the adaptation. Okay. So this is the intuitive idea behind how we are going to perform verification aided machine learning. Now, even though this might look very simple and straightforward, implementation is really hard, and conceptually mapping a machine learning process with a verification process is also very hard. Okay. And what you need to understand here is whenever the machine learning is producing a decision, we are not going to applying it. We are checking if it is good or bad. And this means that whatever you apply is more often than not is the best decision that you can ever get, right? So this is the guarantee that the verification process gives. Okay. So now let us go to the approach overview. It is very similar to what we already saw. Okay, so I'm not going to explain it again, but I just want you to focus on the plan side of it. So in the planning side, we have not one component, we have two components. So we can see there is a decision selector and then there is a decision verifier. So the decision selector will first select an action, which is to switch to a pattern. Then the verifier will check if the pattern is good enough or bad. If the pattern is good, then it executes the adaptation, else it gives a feedback, and again, the selector has to come up with a new pattern. So this process keeps continuing back and forth until and unless you get the best adaptation plan that is possible for the current scenario. Okay. So this is the very, let's say, in-depth view of the decision selector and decision verifier component. I'm not going into details of it because I think it's very low-level detail that is not required from the overview of the talk. But just to say that this was published in the International Conference on Software Architecture last year, and it was one of the candidates for the best paper award, primarily because of the fact that we combined two different worlds of quantitative verification and machine learning to ensure that whatever machine learning, I mean, whatever kind of learning we perform or whatever kind of selections that we do is always valid, right? So this was done in collaboration with Javier Camara from University of York in London. And it was a very good collaboration, I would say, and we are continuing to work on something hopefully wonderful to see how we can combine machine learning and quantitative verification for not just IoT system, but for different class of systems. Okay, so but this is just to give an idea that it's not a very simplistic process, it's a very complex process. So there are multiple components that are involved to ensure that there is a continuous back and forth interaction between the machine learning and the verification process to ensure that the machine learning always gives the best decision. Okay. Okay, so this is again another slide. I think it's not important for the sake of time, but just to give an idea that the model generation process, what it does is it takes each of the patterns. So you can see SU, SC, and CO. It understands that what kind of components are there. So you have a sensor, you have a database, you have a controller component, and you have a display component. Now for each of the component, it comes up with a type of process. So for example, sensor produces the data, and sensor can also send the data to other components. So that's why it is called produce forward. But in the case of synthesize command, the sensor does not forward the data, it just produces the data. Similarly, for each of the pattern, for each of the components, you can create multiple process types. And based on the process type, you create different formal models. And these formal models are then used for verification of how good your decision is. Okay. Again, I'm not going into the details of it, but you could see, for example, here, when we say something like this, it means that the overall energy consumed during H should be restricted by a particular value. Okay, so this is how you specify a CSL formula. This is in continuous stochastic logic, right? So you could specify things like this, and based on this, you could check the model to understand if your if the execution of the trace of the trace of the system satisfy the property or not. Okay. Okay, so for the implementation here, we just don't want to improve the energy efficiency and data traffic, but we also want to ensure that whatever pattern we select is the best optimal pattern that we could have selected given the scenario. Okay, so here we added one additional component. So you could see in the diagram, the blue, whatever is highlighted in the blue is the new component, right? So once the quality of service predictor comes up with a prediction, it is sent to the Q-learning. Now the Q-learning will send the decision to a decision verifier. So for verification, we use Prism model checking. Okay, it's a very famous model checking engine, and the verifier will say if the verification was good or bad. If it was good, then it is sent to the execution for further execution of the adaptation. Okay, and we had a very big challenge because the decision selector was written in Python and the verifier component was written in Java, and you need to ensure that there was a constant communication between Java and Python, and all this had to happen in real time. So that was really challenging. But luckily we were able to implement it, and you could get all this implementation details in this GitHub. So it is open source, so you can go into this link and you can see how we have implemented this too. And we also have a very good README, so you could easily set it up in your system. Okay, so experiment and evaluation. So I just said the one important thing, that it is not just about improving the energy and data traffic, but we wanted to ensure that whatever we select is the best optimal pattern for the given scenario. So for this, we defined something called a utility. So we defined a utility function. I'm not again explaining it, but just to say that the utility is something that combines the energy savings as well as the data traffic savings. Okay, so the utility function gives weight to the energy savings as well as to the data traffic savings. So the formula here you see is utility at any point tau, interval tau, is determined by WE, which is the, let's say, a weight given to the energy consumption along with the energy saved, plus WD, which is the weight given to the data traffic along with the data traffic that was saved. Okay, so this formula, the objective is then to maximize the value of U for every interval, such that which will of course mean that we are able to save energy efficiency as well as data traffic. Okay, so the objective again is to maximize the utility function U tau. Okay, so that is the idea. Now, first thing we want to check was with respect, of course, we already know that we are getting very good accuracy with energy consumption and data traffic. So I'm not going to show the graph again of energy forecast and traffic forecast. So the first question that we wanted to solve here is how good is the effectiveness with respect to the energy and data traffic goals. Okay, so here you can see the first approach, which is collect organize. So again, we know the energy consumption is less, the data traffic is high, so the overall utility was not that great. Okay. Similarly, with the case of SU, energy is really high, data traffic is very less, so the utility is also very low because we were giving more preference to energy savings. Then in the case of SC, again, energy is in between, data traffic is not that good, and the utility is somewhat okay. But UK's RLMC, which is the approach that I was just presenting, it uses a combination of reinforcement learning, and MC stands for model checking. Okay, and you could see the utility is the highest because it consumes less energy and the data traffic is also not that high. And now you can compare this with a traditional model checking. So here MC just uses model checking, so it does not use reinforcement learning. It simply uses model checking. But even then, the approach does not work well. Then you have reinforcement learning, which is something that we saw in the previous approach, where we just use reinforcement learning. But even in that case, the utility was not really that high. So the highest utility was given by combining reinforcement learning along with model checking. So it shows how good it is to combine verification process with machine learning process, because it is able to guarantee correctness of every adaptation performed. Okay. Now, I want to check one more thing. I wanted to tell you how good it is to add model checker, because if you see this graph, it is a cumulative utility plot. Okay, so which means that with time, how the utility improved for each of the approaches. So if you see all this 1, 2, 3, 4 lines here, right, you could see that the growth is not really that high, because at some point you could see that after, let's say 80 or something, they are mostly moving steady. It is not a steep increase. But in the case of RLMC, if you observe, it is steadily increasing, and the steepness is even growing higher and higher as time progresses. This is because as time progresses, model checking is able to correct reinforcement learning, and it is able to make better and better decisions, right? So this is why you can see a steep increase in RLMC even compared to an RL. Okay, so this shows the effectiveness of adding something like a model checker along with reinforcement learning. And on the other side, you could see the number of corrections that was made by model checker. And this is an important plot. Why? Because if you see the initial part of it, that is the initial time intervals, I mean, that is clustered over here till 80, you could see there are a lot of corrections that are made by model checking. So reinforcement learning was producing a lot of wrong decisions. But as time progresses, the number of this number of correction is decreasing. You could see most of them after 80 are in the 0 mark. But before 80, you could see a lot of clusters which are not in zeros, right? So this shows that over a period of time, with the help of model checker, reinforcement learning is able to improve itself better and better. Okay. Okay, so regarding the efficiency, in total, RLMC takes a little longer time. So it takes around 2 seconds for executing an adaptation, where the reinforcement learning part, as we all know, just takes 0.23 seconds. Okay. And there was about 1 second that was taken by model checking on average for performing the verification, right? So that was because model checking, as I said, is an exhaustive process and it takes more time to complete. So it was taking on average 1 second, okay, to performing the verification. So again, what we can see is model checking is an overhead because it takes more time, but it provides the guarantees on the machine learning, and we are doing everything in a proactive way. So we are not stopping the system. We are just doing everything beforehand so that the system does not encounter a failure or the system does not run into some kind of an issue. Okay. So that was the idea of using, let's say, model checker, and then using reinforcement learning, and then using recurrent neural network. Okay, so as I said, we are coming to the end of the talk. So what we have done is we have essentially moved from self-adaptation to self-learning, where again, we have a software architecture. We use some kind of verification technique to validate the architecture. We deploy the system. We continuously monitor. We learn from it. Then we adapt the system. Now, during the validation, if I feel that the system is not satisfying, then I again go to this process where I learn again I perform the adaptation. And when the learning or when the system is valid, then I deploy the system, right? So this process keeps continuing, and that's why we call this as towards self-learnable software architecture, because we certainly believe that in future, software architecture will be like this, where the architecture is not just going to be a static component, but rather it is going to evolve dynamically, and it is going to learn continuously over a period of time. Okay, so just concluding, we saw what is software architecture and what are the current challenges that we have, what we mean by self-adaptive systems, what are the definition and the state of the art and challenges in self-adaptation. We saw what are the challenges in architecting IoT system and how self-adaptation can be of help. We also saw how machine learning can come into the picture, how it can aid adaptations. Then we finally saw how verification techniques can be used to aid machine learning, right? And essentially we moved over these 2 days from the concept of self-adaptation to self-learning. Okay, so that's it from my side. So thank you all again for joining, and I'll be happy to answer your questions now if you have, because I think we still have around 10 minutes, and I intentionally was going little in a fast way so that we'll have some kind of time for interaction. You could also connect to me via my email, that is karthik.vaidyanathan@univac.it. You can go to my website and you can simply type in your query there. You can also connect with me in Twitter or LinkedIn. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the session. And we have few more questions in the Menti if we have time. So let's go to the questions, which is this. So I'm going to start the question. Yeah, now I see people are there. So 5 are there. That's great. So, okay, 6, 7. That's it. So let me then go to the question, right? Okay, so the question is coming. What is the use of Q-table? That's a very simple question. So you have 15 seconds to answer. So today I have just shortened the time a bit. Uh-oh, I don't see any answers, by the way. 2, 3, 4. 5. Okay, so time's up. Okay, so it allows agent to select. Perfect. So the correct answer is it allows agent to select an optimal action based on its current state. So the first option was it allows agent to obtain rewards. Okay, no, Qtable is not just for that. It provides agent to check for different states and actions. Yes and no, because of course there are a lot of states and actions, but the agent is not even aware of what state it can get into, right? But rather the answer will be it allows the agent to select an optimal action given a current state. Okay, so that is the use of Qtable. And I think we have one more question if I'm not wrong. Okay, so here question 3 of 3. I think this is the final question. Yeah. So how can QV help RL? Right. So just what we saw. First one is it can reduce the action space of RL. I'm sorry. Then the second is it can verify the decision and provide feedback to RL. Third is it can reduce the state space of RL. Okay, 4 people have answered. Great. So all 4 got it wrong. I mean, so all four got it right. So I understand that you all would have got the correct answer. So I'm happy that you got the concept right. So the important thing was to understand that quantitative verification can provide feedback to reinforcement learning to improve the learning process, right? Okay, so that's it. I think this is just what are your takeaways. So if you have anything, you can just put inside this. Feel free, or you can also ask questions here. So if you don't want to ask questions over the mic, you can also type in your questions so I could answer. In the meanwhile, I am here. So if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Yeah. So any questions from the audience? Okay, I don't see any question in the chat as well. Okay, so I don't see anything here, and I don't see anything in the chat. I think so. Maybe that's it, and I think maybe it was very clear, or maybe I was not even clear. So I mean, if there are no questions, there are only 2 possibilities. So maybe I was very clear, or maybe I was not even clear. But in any case, I'm happy that most of you got all the questions right, and I'm happy that most of you got the concepts right. So if you have any further questions, as I said, feel free to connect with me in LinkedIn or Twitter, or you can even send me a direct email, and I'll be happy to answer. Okay. Okay, so once again, thank you for the organizers for inviting me. Especially thank you, Mrs. Devika, and thank you the entire institute for inviting me and for hosting me for this wonderful FDP program. And I, of course, know that there are 2 more sessions that are coming up in the next days. So please attend them. And I saw the topics and they are also really interesting. So thank you from my side. Have a nice day. Anything else, ma'am?
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amita, and I'm here to present the vote of thanks for today's session. I would like to thank our resource person, Dr. Karthik Vaidyanathan, for sharing and enlightening us with his knowledge. Both of his sessions were full of knowledge and interesting things, and it gave deep insights into the topic and also revealed some interesting facts. Once again, I would like to thank Dr. Karthik Vaidyanathan for taking out time from his busy schedule. Thank you so much, sir. Also, I would like
Thank
to
you. It was
thank.
my pleasure.
Okay. Also, I would like to thank all the participants who gathered to today's session. Thank you once again. And there is one important information. We are sorry to inform you all that the session scheduled on 24th April has been cancelled due to the health issues of our resource person, Ms. Shaija N. We regret for any inconvenience caused to you. And there won't be any change in the session scheduled on 26th April. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.